The deadbolt clicked behind me before I even reached the sidewalk. I turned around and stared at my brother through the glass door. Wesley stood inside our Scottsdale home with his arms folded, while my mother watched from the hallway as if she had been waiting for me to finally understand something everyone else already knew. "You are not coming back inside, Marianne," Wesley said. I looked down at the 2 suitcases beside me. "What are you talking about?" He did not answer. He pointed toward the driveway instead. A black SUV was parked there, and a man I had never seen before was measuring the front entrance. Then my mother said the words that made my stomach drop. "The house has been sold. I am Marianne, 46 years old, and for 15 years I had believed our Scottsdale, Arizona home was the one place my family could never take away from me. I had been standing in that entryway only minutes earlier, trying to understand why my belongings had suddenly been packed into cardboard boxes, why my mother would not look me in the eye, and why Wesley had changed the subject every time I asked what was happening. Now I knew. They had already sold it. They had simply waited until there was nothing I could do about it. Sold to who? I asked. Wesley sighed like I was making everything harder than it needed to be. "It is done, Marianne. That is not an answer. You do not need to know every detail." I stared at him. "It is my house." His expression hardened. "No, it was Dad's house. Then Mom's. You do not own it." That sentence hurt more than the lock turning behind me. My mother finally spoke. "Wesley is handling the finances. You do not understand what this house is worth." I looked through the window at the living room where I had spent Christmas mornings, birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, and countless ordinary evenings with my daughter, Tessa. "I understand exactly what it is worth," I said. "You just do not understand what it meant to me." Wesley shook his head. "This is why nobody can talk to you. Everything has to become emotional." Emotional. That was the word they used whenever I asked questions they did not want to answer. I had spent years believing Wesley was the responsible one. He was the polished one. The brother who always had an explanation ready, always wore a pressed shirt to family dinners, always knew which banker to call and which contractor to recommend. When Dad died, Wesley became the person everyone leaned on. I had let him. I was working, raising Tessa, and trying to rebuild my life after my divorce. I did not have the energy to fight over every financial decision. I trusted my family. That was my mistake. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. My mother looked away. Wesley said, "You have friends." I almost laughed. "You are throwing me out of my home and telling me to call a friend? You are being dramatic. You packed my bedroom." His eyes flickered toward the stairs. "You were not using half of that stuff. You went through my things. We had to prepare the property." Prepare the property. The phrase sounded absurd until I saw another stranger walk through the kitchen carrying a folder. That was when I realized the buyer was not coming tomorrow. The buyer was already involved. This was not a family argument. This was a transaction. A transaction I had somehow been excluded from. I picked up my suitcase. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the handle. "Does Tessa know?" I asked. Wesley did not respond. My phone buzzed. It was Tessa. "Mom, are you okay?" I had no idea what to tell her. She had gone out that afternoon believing I was coming home for dinner. Instead, I was standing on the curb with my life packed into 2 suitcases. I typed a short message telling her to meet me at the hotel and not to call Grandma yet. Then I looked one last time at the house. The white stucco walls were glowing beneath the late Arizona sun. The landscaping was immaculate. The palms along the driveway moved slightly in the dry evening breeze. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was the cruelest part. The house looked exactly like home while I stood outside it like a stranger. The hotel room was 20 minutes away. The air conditioner rattled all night. Tessa arrived just after 8, still wearing the jeans and sneakers she had worn earlier. She opened the door, saw my suitcases, and froze. "Mom," I tried to smile. "I am okay." She immediately knew I was not. "What happened?" I sat on the edge of the bed. "Grandma and Uncle Wesley sold the house." Her face changed. "What?" "They said I did not own it, but Grandpa left it to the family." "That is what I thought." "Did you sign anything?" I shook my head. "No." "Then how did they sell it?" That question followed me into the night. I did not sleep. I kept opening my phone and staring at old photographs. Tessa at 16 in the backyard. Dad grilling steaks beside the pool. My mother sitting under the covered patio on Thanksgiving. Wesley holding a glass of wine while everyone laughed around him. There were hundreds of pictures, and suddenly every one of them felt like evidence from a life that belonged to somebody else. By morning, I had started questioning myself. Maybe I had misunderstood Dad's arrangements. Maybe Maybe Wesley really had handled everything legally. Maybe I had been so attached to the house that I could not accept reality. That possibility was almost comforting because it meant nobody had deliberately betrayed me. Then I opened my email and found something that made my chest tighten. It was an old message from Dad's estate attorney from years earlier. I remembered receiving it after Dad died, but I had never opened the attachment because Wesley told me there was nothing I needed to handle personally. I searched for the email. My fingers moved faster as I scrolled. There it was. The subject line was simple: estate documents. I opened the attachment. The first page was difficult to understand, full of legal language and property descriptions. Then I saw the address: our Scottsdale home. I read the paragraph twice. It mentioned a family trust. It mentioned beneficiaries. And then I saw my name, Marianne. I called Wesley immediately. He answered on the fourth ring. What? Why was Dad's house placed into a trust? I asked. There was silence. Not confusion. Silence. Where did you get that? He finally asked. My stomach dropped. So you knew. Marianne, you were looking at an old document you do not understand. Then explain it. Not over the phone. Explain it now. He lowered his voice. You need to stop digging into things you are not equipped to handle. I stared at the wall. You sold the house without telling me. We sold a property to protect the family. You said I did not own it. You did not have control of it. That is different. Not in the way that matters. He hung up. I sat there for several minutes with the phone still against my ear. Tessa had been listening from the other bed. Mom, she said quietly, he is scared. I looked at her. Why would he be scared? She did not answer. Neither did I. But for the first time since I had been thrown out, I stopped wondering whether I had imagined the betrayal. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The real estate sign had already been removed. The sale was moving quickly. Too quickly. I drove back to the hotel and started searching public property records. The first thing I found was the recorded sale. The second thing I found made my hands go cold. The buyer had paid just over $2.8 million. That was enough money to explain why Wesley had rushed the sale. But it did not explain why he had excluded me. I kept reading. The ownership history showed several transfers over the years, but one document from after Dad's death did not match what Wesley had told me. There had been a change in the structure of ownership. I printed everything I could find. Then I noticed something else. The transfer had happened shortly before Wesley's business began having problems. I searched his company records, liens, delinquent filings, a lender's claim, then another. My brother had not been protecting the family from financial trouble. He had been trying to outrun his own. The next morning, while I was sitting at the hotel desk surrounded by printed records, my phone rang. The number was local to Scottsdale. I almost ignored it. I answered anyway. Hello, a man's voice said. Is this Marianne? Yes. My name is Graham. I recently purchased a home in Scottsdale. My heart started beating faster. Which home? The one on East Vierlinder. I could not breathe for a second. Why are you calling me? There was a pause. Because during the inspection, we found something in the house that does not make sense. I stood up. What did you find? I do not think I should explain this over the phone. Then why are you calling me? Because your name is connected to it. Connected how? Another pause. I think you need to come see what we found. I looked at the papers spread across the desk. The trust, the transfer, Wesley's debts, the sale. None of it made sense anymore. Graham continued. And Marianne, there is something else. What? The document we found suggests the way this property was sold may not match the way it was supposed to be owned. I closed my eyes. The room seemed suddenly silent. What document? I asked. I think it is better if you see it yourself. He gave me an address and a time. Before hanging up, he said one final thing. Please bring whatever records you have concerning your father's estate. I stared at the phone after the call ended. For 3 days, I had believed my family had taken my home because they thought I was too weak to fight for it. Now a complete stranger was telling me that the story they had given me might not even be the real story. And for the first time, I wondered what Wesley had been so desperate to hide. Graham was waiting for me outside the house when I arrived the next afternoon. He was around 50, dressed casually in a navy polo shirt, and looked nothing like the kind of man I had expected to see after buying a $2.8 million Scottsdale property. There was no arrogance in his expression. If anything, he looked uncomfortable. You must be Marianne, he said. I nodded. He glanced at the folder in my hand. Did you bring the estate documents? I held them tighter. Yes. He opened the gate and motioned for me to follow him. Walking through that front yard backyard felt surreal. The bougainvillea was still climbing along the wall. The pool still reflected the afternoon sun. The same stone path led toward the front door where Wesley had locked me out days earlier. But now I was entering with the new owner. Graham noticed me staring. "I know this is difficult," he said. I did not answer. Inside, the house looked almost untouched. A few pieces of furniture had been removed, but most of the rooms were exactly as I remembered them. Graham led me toward the kitchen. During the inspection, we found an old built-in cabinet behind the breakfast area. The previous owners had covered part of it during a remodel. We were replacing the cabinetry when we discovered a recessed compartment behind the wood panel. He opened a drawer and removed a flat grey folder. This was inside. My heart started pounding before I even touched it. The folder was old, but the documents inside had been carefully preserved. The first page was a property agreement dated years before my father died. I recognized his signature immediately. Graham pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. "Read that." I did. The document stated that the Scottsdale property had been transferred into a family trust, with specific beneficial interests assigned to family members. My name appeared first, then Tesser's. I looked up. Why did Wesley say I had no ownership interest? Graham shook his head. "I cannot answer that, but I can tell you what happened next." He handed me another document. This one was newer. It showed an amendment to the trust. My name had been removed from a section describing the beneficial interest. The date was 18 months after my father died. I stared at the signature line. My mother's name was there. So was Wesley's. Mine was not. But that was not the worst part. Graham turned to another page. The amendment stated that I had voluntarily surrendered my interest in the property. I felt the room tilt. "I never signed this." Graham nodded. "That is what concerned us." I looked at the signature attached to the document. It resembled mine from a distance, but the longer I studied it, the more wrong it looked. The spacing was different. The pressure was wrong. Even the way the final letter curved was unlike my handwriting. "This is not my signature," I said. Graham did not react dramatically. He simply said, "That was our concern too." I sat down at the kitchen island. For years, I had wondered whether I had somehow misunderstood my father's wishes. Now I was holding a document claiming I had given up something I had never agreed to surrender. Why would they do this? I asked. Graham hesitated. There was one more document. He pulled out a copy of a lender's agreement. "Your brother used his interest in the property as part of a financial arrangement," he said. My stomach tightened. Wesley borrowed against the house? Not exactly. He represented that he had authority over the property and that the family had agreed to use it as security. But the records we found did not support that. I looked down at the papers. So the house was never supposed to be sold like this. Graham shook his head. "The problem is that I purchased the property based on the recorded documents available at the time. I am not here to accuse your family or tell you what your legal rights are. I am telling you that the paperwork we discovered raised serious questions." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. My brother had not simply lied to me. He had built an entire story around a false document, then used that story to convince everyone that I was the problem. Graham handed me one final page. "This was a letter from your father." I recognized the handwriting before I read a single word. Dad had written the letter several months before his death. It was addressed to the trustee and explained his wishes for the Scottsdale home. He wanted it preserved as a family property for Marianne and her daughter, Tesser. He wrote that he did not want the house treated as a source of personal wealth for one family member. He wanted it to remain a place where future generations could return. I covered my mouth. All those years, I had believed the house was sentimental because of what happened there. I never knew my father had intentionally protected it for me and Tesser. Graham gave me a moment before continuing. "There is something else you should know." I looked at him. When my team discovered these documents, we reviewed the transaction history again. The sale price was fair. The issue was not the price. It was how your family established authority to sell. I understood then. They had not needed to make the house look worthless. They needed to make me look irrelevant. I took copies of everything Graham gave me and left. I did not call Wesley immediately. For the first time, I wanted to know the truth before confronting him. I contacted the estate attorney whose name appeared on Dad's old records. She was retired, but her office forwarded my message to the attorney who had taken over her files. 2 days later, I sat across from a woman named Karen who spent nearly an hour reviewing the documents. She did not promise me anything. She did not tell me I was automatically entitled to the house. Instead, she explained the problem carefully. property. The trust amendment required evidence that I had voluntarily surrendered my interest. The document they used did not contain that evidence beyond the questionable signature. There were also inconsistencies between the amendment and other estate records, and the lender documents suggested Wesley had represented himself as having authority he may not have possessed. Karen told me that the situation needed to be investigated properly. That was enough. For the first time, I knew I was not imagining it. Then she found something I had never seen: a scanned copy of an email from Wesley to my mother. The message had been preserved in the estate file because it had been forwarded to the attorney years earlier. In it, Wesley explained that his company was in serious trouble and that creditors were beginning to close in. He wrote that if they did not restructure the property, they could lose everything. He also wrote that I would never agree to use the house as collateral, so they needed another solution. I read the message twice. My mother had known. She had known Wesley was in trouble. She had known he was using the property to protect himself. And instead of telling me, she had helped him create a story that I had surrendered my interest. I called her that evening. She answered immediately. "Marianne, where are you?" "At a hotel. The same hotel you sent me to after throwing me out of my house." Silence. "I have the documents." "Mom." Her breathing changed. "What documents?" "Dad's trust, the amendment, the letter he wrote, and Wesley's email about the business." She said nothing. I asked the question I had been afraid to ask for years. "Did you know?" "Finally," she whispered. "I was trying to protect the family." "You were protecting Wesley. He was going to lose his business. And you thought sacrificing me would save him? It was supposed to be temporary." I almost laughed. "Temporary? You changed my legal interest in my father's property and forged my signature." "We did not forge anything." "You know you did." Wesley had convinced her that I would eventually understand. He had told her that the house would be returned to me once his business recovered. But his business never recovered. Instead, the debts grew. When the buyer made an offer above $2.8 million, Wesley saw an escape. He convinced my mother that selling was the only way to prevent creditors from taking everything. Then they needed me out of the way. That was why they had humiliated me so quickly. They wanted me gone before I could ask questions. I returned to Scottsdale the following morning. This time, I did not go alone. Graham agreed to meet us at the house because he wanted the transaction records discussed with everyone present. My mother arrived first. Wesley came 10 minutes later. He looked confident until he saw the folder in my hand. "You should not have gotten involved with this," he said. I placed the documents on the table. "You should not have sold my father's house." He looked at Graham. "This is a private family matter." Graham remained calm. "I purchased the property legally based on the records available to me. I am only here because the documents discovered during renovation raised questions about the ownership history." Wesley looked at me. "You are going to destroy everything over a technicality?" "A technicality?" I repeated. "You forged my name. You told everyone I abandoned my interest. You used the property to cover your business debts." He slammed his hand against the table. "I did what I had to do." I finally looked directly at him. "No, you did what you wanted to do, and you convinced everyone else that I deserved the consequences." My mother started crying. Wesley turned toward her. "Mom, tell her why we did it." She could not. I stepped closer to my brother. "You did not save the family. You sold my place in it." He looked away. That was the moment I knew the fight was over, even though the legal process had not yet finished. The investigation eventually confirmed enough inconsistencies to challenge the transaction. The buyer cooperated fully. Wesley's financial problems became impossible to hide. His company collapsed under the debts he had spent years trying to conceal, and the family could no longer pretend that his decisions had been made for everyone else. My mother admitted what she had done. It did not repair the damage, but at least I no longer had to question my own memory. I eventually received the interest that had been wrongfully taken from me through a negotiated resolution. I could have fought to keep the Scottsdale property, but I chose not to. Too many memories were attached to those walls. Some were beautiful, others were painful enough that I knew I could never live there peacefully again. The house was eventually sold again, and I used my share to buy a smaller home where Tessa and I could start over. It was not a $2.8 million mansion. It did not have a resort-style pool or mountain views. But the first night we slept there, Tessa sat beside me on the back patio and said something I will never forget. "Mom, this feels more like home than that house ever did." She was right. I had spent weeks believing that losing the Scottsdale house meant losing my place in my family. I finally understood that those were two completely different things. A home is not valuable because of its price, its square footage, or the name written on a deed. It is valuable because of what you build inside it and who is allowed to feel safe there. My family had tried to convince me that losing a property meant I had lost my worth. They were wrong. They could take possessions. They could change locks. They could rewrite a story and repeat it until everyone believed it. But they could not decide who I was. Sometimes losing the place you thought would always be yours is what finally teaches you to build a place that belongs to you completely. And if you have ever been pushed aside by the people you trusted most, remember this: being rejected does not mean you are unwanted. Sometimes the door that closes behind you is simply making room for a life where you no longer have to beg to belong.